Welcome to wasmCloud Wednesday for February the 9th, 2022. We're going to start, as usual, with a quick demo, and we're going to hand off to Nikki, who's going to give us a quick readout of a quick change that we made to the washboard. Nikki, go ahead. You have permission to share.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity. It's really just a couple of very simple bug fixes that were needed to be done. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is actually the fixed screen. So this is after the fixes were in place. Basically, it was to simplify some of the copying of the actor and provider ID. So prior to this change, there was a button in between here. Hopefully you guys can see my mouse between the copy actor ID and the settings, which was copy host ID. And the reason that was a little bit confusing was because a host ID is down here and it didn't have the original few characters. So before the bug fix, people just saw two copy icons and they weren't sure, what is what. So the change was primarily to do two things. Make the copy icon a little bit more explicit so you could actually see some of the first few identifiers. So this wasn't there before, and this wasn't there before. And to remove the host ID because the host ID is already down here. So I think the net effect of this change is that it's a lot more consistent between these various boxes, between the actors box, the provider box, right? And really the change is very simple. You put your mouse over it. It says copy actor ID, that was there before. Copy provider ID, again, that was there before. And now, when you click on these buttons, they just simply work, right? I won't copy it and show it to you, but you can take my word for it. The other item, which was a small cleanup, which was caught by Brooks and asked me to pick up as well. This copy icon, even though it showed the first few characters of the ID, when you clicked on copy and it said it copied, it didn't actually copy. So again, that was a very minor bug fix. But I think the net result of these changes is, even though they're very simple changes, but I think it does help with the clarity of the dashboard. And I think it's a little bit easier to use. That's really all I had, unless someone has a question for me.
No, that's awesome, Nikki. I really appreciate you taking the time to knock these out. That's absolutely phenomenal. There's no questions for Nikki. We'll move on to our second demo. Brooks, I think you have a demo that was driven around some of the experience that Matt's and someone else had with testing. I can't remember who, honestly, out of Slack.
Yeah, I think their Slack handle may be VGK or something like that. But in general, just some feedback around our testing flow for wasmCloud in general. So I wanted to show you a little bit of an improvement that we have for actor development. Actors are the main business logic that you're writing with wasmCloud applications. So certainly trying to make that as seamless as possible. And I want to show you an improvement we put in for unit testing actors. So if you use, and you all should be able to see VS Code, all fine and good. I'll be doing some things in the terminal and some things in the actual window. But if you use Wash to generate a new actor project, we open that up, then Rust Analyzer is going to build. What we saw before is you couldn't actually write unit tests for actors. So if you were to do, and anybody who's written Rust before, this is going to look familiar, but if you haven't, you can essentially set up a special place in your Rust files. It can be at the bottom, it can be in a different file, it doesn't really matter, but just a special place that you can define tests in. And this will only compile when you run cargo test, and you can use it to assert certain functionality in your code, just a classic unit test. So, something you may see across a couple projects is like a boilerplate test like this. Like, it works, we create a variable X and assign it 1, we assert that 1 equals 1, right? Just making sure that you can run a test. Now, previously, when you're running this, if you were to try to develop a wasmCloud actor and run this test, if you run cargo test, could have compiled it beforehand, but I wanted to see it. We'll get an error saying you can't execute a binary file. And the root cause of this is when you compile something for testing mode, essentially you compile it and then your computer tries to run the output binary to run the tests on it, essentially. And since it's a WebAssembly module, my computer, Arch Mac, doesn't know how to run a WebAssembly module. So there are various different ways of tackling this. You can have like a light shim. This is what wasmBindGen does. It basically just like launches a small WebAssembly runtime to run your WebAssembly module inside of it. This is certainly something that we're considering and want to move towards in the future for doing like complex or more complex integration tests. But for unit tests, we actually were able to make a change to the wasmBus macro to make it so that you can run unit tests in an actor file without doing a light shim, without too much configuration. So what we have now is if you run cargo test, is that what I did before? Yeah, if you run cargo test, you can pass it the target triple of your host machine, which I think, I don't know, it's Apple Darwin. And then this has to recompile because it's compiling a dynamic library, all that stuff. But we essentially compile this actor without any of the WebAssembly specific imports, which make it so that normally if you did this before, this would fail to compile on your machine because it doesn't know how to handle things like guest called or host called, the things that we use to communicate between the host and the actor. So the down and dirty of it is we conditionally compile that stuff out if it's not on the WebAssembly target. So you can actually write tests. And this is a simple example, but one of the example that I showed in the documentation, I'm about to publish this so that everybody can try this out, is we'd love to be able to assert things that our actor is doing, right? So we want to be able to write a test for this hello actor to make sure that we get the proper HTTP response back. So if we write something like, we create our request, which is an HTTP request object, we want to get a response back from handling the HTTP request, and then we want to assert things about that response. There's a little bit of modification that you have to do here. This is something that you'll run into anytime you're doing unit tests, but specifically for Rust, doing async tests are a little bit more difficult. They require like a runtime like Tokyo. So if we take this functionality that we have here in the actor handler and just put it in a synchronous function where we don't need to pass a self, we don't need to pass a context, we can test more the pure logic than like an integration test. So if we have a handle HTTP request function, which takes in an HTTP request and returns a standard result with an HTTP response and an RPC error, this is the same function signature as above. We can actually just kind of take all of this logic out and put it into this function and instead call the HTTP this handler. So all I'm doing is taking all of that out and putting it in a synchronous function, which is a little more logic based. It's taking the request, turning it into a response, not dealing with anything else. But what we can do now is we can actually test that this function is doing what we want it to. So if we write out a full unit test with the request, we can unwrap that because it's a test and that's fine. We can assert things like that the response status code is 200, that this is an actual successful HTTP request. We can assert things like the response.body is what we expect it to be. And if we think about this, I don't know if you all have seen this, if you've seen this example or not before, but what this hello actor is doing is it's essentially saying hello, and then whatever you give as a name in the HTTP request, we say hello to that name. So if we craft our HTTP request here, we can do a GET request. The path can just be /, doesn't really factor into it. The query string, we give name equals, I don't know, awesome community. The header, we can just do an empty hash map. And the body, we also don't. care about. This is a simple unit test, making sure that we're getting back the correct body. So we can assert that the response is hello, awesome community. And the response body is a vector of bytes. So we can just turn that into a string instead. So we've got our simple unit test, can handle HTTP request. We constructed our full object. We're calling the function that we're trying to assert. And we make sure that it's a successful response, and we have the body that we expect. Now we can run this, we can actually run this test directly from VS Code. We click run test. Check it out, we get an okay. And I'm not faking anything. If we fail this test, assert equals 2 or whatever, we get a stack trace. We actually are doing these unit tests. Don't mean to project the trust issues. Just want to show this is a real demo that we're doing. And there's the only other thing that I've done here in order to run the unit test in VS Code is I just updated my Rust analyzer. When you run a test, it passes the native target. So the TLDR here is running unit tests is now possible in wasmCloud actors. It's fairly simple, doesn't need much modification. You just need to tell Cargo to run the test on your machine's target. But in general, this is a big step forward because there wasn't really a way to run any kind of cargo test on an actor or on a WebAssembly module without having that shim, and that adds in complexity. You may need to download wasmtime or with wasm-bindgen, you need Node.js or things like that. So like I mentioned, this is all ready to go when you generate a new project now. You should be able to, as long as you have wasm-bus RPC 0.7 or later, you should have access to being able to do this. And we'll have a new section in our documentation coming out probably a little later today or a little bit later this week on writing these tests. So looking forward to see if this helps solve some of the pain points of just writing some simple stateless functionality tests.
Brooks, your demo is awesome, man. Was that like Banthan Raider? Any questions for Brooks? I think getting that example checked in would be awesome, and making sure we get that, making sure we get the documentation out there would be great. I know that this was a real pain point, and I think my favorite thing is that, internally we didn't even have to like spike to say Tuscan Raider. Thank you, Taylor. I guess they ride Banthas. We didn't even have to spike. Like the team just kind of like saw the pain that that Mats and Vic were VG were having, and or Vic were having, and just kind of swarmed to it to fix it. And I just love that sort of like care for everybody across the community and for the folks that are building. And I think Mats has some awesome pull requests in flight that I don't want to spoil because I know we have even more demos today. Steve, I think you and Bailey have been talking about a great one for the SQL provider. Do you want to do a quick preview of what you guys have been working on?
Yes, I will. I'll first I wanted to give a shout out to Matt Sparson. He did submit a PR for Blobstore interface, and we had before the migration to the 0.50 wasmCloud host, we had a Blobstore capability provider interface, and there was a file system provider and an Amazon S3 provider that used that interface. And so Matt responded to the help wanted tag on the repo and has picked it up and carried the ball. And so that the file system provider's in progress, and there's also an S3 provider in progress. They're both using that interface. So within the next few days, that the interface PR should be merged, and we should have a couple more providers soon. So that's awesome. And thanks to Matt for that work. and I wanted to talk about unions in Smithy interfaces. So, by the way, there's a recent video. I'm going to paste the link into the Zoom chat here that Amazon posted about why they created Smithy, and it's kind of a neat overview of the history, why they built it, and what goals it solves. They use Smithy IDL for describing interfaces for something like 270 services. It's pretty powerful. We've only used a subset of the Smithy capability, and one of the things that we didn't have support for is unions. And we have some experimental support for that now. So I'm going to share a window with my IDE. Right now, this is checked in as a PR, and there's some notes. There's some notes in the README that say this is experimental, but what we can do now is declare a union. If you're a REST developer, it's more like an enum, but you can have an object that can have more than one data type. And we've had some workarounds for this in our interfaces already. For example, in the key value store, there's a return code that has a Boolean flag for whether or not the result is successful, and then an optional error string. So this is the kind of thing that could be consolidated into a union. But one of the big motivating cases is the SQL interface, where we want to be able to do prepared statements and be able to pass a bunch of parameters in with a prepared statement. And that's been kind of hard to do, and we're now going to be able to do that. So here's some examples in this Smithy file. So I'm not going to type a demo because I can't type and talk at the same time like Brooks can. So I'm going to show you show you the files. So here's an example of a response you could do. Is either returning data or an error. And the union can have any data type. It could be a structure or any of an array, any kind of value. Here's another kind of thing you could do is something that's analogous to a JSON value where it could have any type. And this is, again, just a demo, but here's a value that could take any of these data types all the way down to a float or a blob. And over here on the right, if you can see the screen, when the code generator processes this, it creates this enum in Rust that gives one of those values. So right now, the union support is, I called it a demo release. We'd like to get some feedback on it. The way we do code generation could change a little bit. So I wrote in there that over the next 45 days or so, we'll probably experiment with this. So don't use it for production code, but we would definitely love some feedback on it and hear about how you might want to use it and if it's useful to you. Any questions? All right. That's unions.
All right. Well, that is super exciting. I'm really excited about the more advanced capabilities, Steve, and I thought your demo was awesome too. You know, there's lots of room for people to demo in different ways. We had already 3 demos today, which I think is incredible. Are there any other demos on the call today, or anything people want to share that they're working on? I would just call out as a fun demo, if people did not see it in Slack, I would encourage you to check out. There was somebody that did a drive-by on our Slack and dropped a new video game they've been experimenting with, to the 2048 game. It was just really neat to have, another. It's always fun when community members show up with stuff that, it's like that are as excited about wasmCloud as we are, which is awesome. And I hope Matt, to your point, I hope that he open sources that as well, and just continues to develop and plug some features in, because it is cool to see people building a lot of fun stuff in wasmCloud. I think we've got a few other topics to bring up today, but before we do, I kind of want to turn to two community topics. The first topic is that submissions are still open across the board for KubeCon EU. A couple folks from the Cosmonic and wasmCloud team will for sure be there. Right now, I'll be attending Tuesday through Friday, and I believe that Brooks and Taylor are also going to be in town manning the booth and helping out for WASM Day. We still need volunteers if you're interested in volunteering, and even more, we need talks about any cloud native related WebAssembly talk, whether it's wasmCloud or not. So please feel free to get your submissions in. I would also helpfully mention that there are a few other related days that you may want to submit to as well. Kubernetes on Edge, Kubernetes Security Day, and there's a Kubernetes Telco Day as well. So if you need any collaboration or coordination, if there's Jeff, you and I met late last week about maybe some of the things that we would collab on in the community. If there's any opportunities to bring things out, please get your talk submitted. If you'd like some feedback before you submit your talk, just reach out. We've been able to push the WebAssembly Day back to February 28th for our submissions. And then as a committee, we're going to hustle to get responses back ASAP to get people notified by early March for attendance. I know that folks have been booking flights, and flights are super cheap right now for anybody that is planning on going. I I was working with a team earlier this week, and they booked their flights for like $400, which was pretty amazing. They're flying into Barcelona and taking the train, but I hope to see as many people there, safety permitting, as possible. And then I wanted to hand the mic over to you, Stuart, if you don't mind. If you want to do a plug, I know you've got your event that's in flight, and you can let us all know what's going on.
Thank you, Liam. March 2nd, evening London time. So I guess that's 6:30 our time. It'll be 1:30 your time, right? Yeah. We're having a hybrid event. We love WebAssembly outside the browser. We've got a speaker from Single Store in the UK talking about using WebAssembly to bring processing closer to the data, extending the database basically with WebAssembly, which is great. And Brooks and Taylor have very kindly offered to do a talk. We've just been talking about it just before this meeting, about WebAssembly, so wasmCloud as a step up from Kubernetes, or the journey from Kubernetes to wasmCloud, and the wider context of WebAssembly in the cloud native distributed application space. So that's really, really exciting. We may have some other speakers as well, but they're not confirmed yet. So invites will be going out this week, and all the details will be posted up, and I'll let you know where the URLs are.
All right. Well, whenever you get the self-sign-up, Stuart, feel free to spam our Slack and pin it to channel, and we'll tweet it out from our account and all the things. And I'm really looking forward to the talks as well. That's it's still March 2nd, is that right?
March the 2nd, yeah, which is a Wednesday, at almost exactly this time. So whatever time it is in your time zone now, that is the time it will be.
Well, we're all going to transition right from wasmCloud Wednesday to your event. And that will be the first wasmCloud Wednesday that I'm going to miss. I think I'm going to be on an airplane at the time. So
on the way to Barbados or something, are you going?
Going to the DR. My niece is getting married, and my kids are going to play their violins on the beach. So, and I'm going to drink a whole bunch of pina coladas, but that's for another call. Great. Any other social or community news that anybody wants to mention? Any other events in flight? Great. Then we can turn to open floor or topics.
I've got I do have a community call out today, so I can go ahead and do that. So community call out this week, it includes one, it's just one issue, one thing that we kind of talked about last week. But us at wasmCloud, we're constantly trying to improve our documentation, and especially the new troubleshooting guide that went out, and the new testing guide that just went out. I merged that in right after the demo, so everybody can go play with it. You know, we're really curious if you have gone through any development issues while you've been working on wasmCloud, if there's just an error that you saw in the host logs that you didn't exactly know how to track that down and find out what that meant. You know, there are things that since we've been working on wasmCloud for so long, we know where to look for certain errors. And for somebody who's coming and new to developing actors and providers on wasmCloud, we want to have an easy way for people to be able to search those errors on our documentation. And so I know that this is a little bit of a tough call out because it's kind of asking people to go back in their brains and figure out, like, remember if they had anything. But just a general call, if you try out the actor testing framework, if you are playing with unions, or if you I know Matt's and a couple other people in the community are starting to write their own capability providers. If you're running into anything, love to hear about it here. I'll probably keep this open. I'll probably mention it again next week and then close it a little bit later. I want to time box it so that this issue doesn't just live forever, but we'd love to have any additional feedback that you have. So this is kind of just an open call for anybody in the community to give us some feedback or drop some errors that you've seen and we're confused about. Perfect. I see Stuart said that he's got one that he wants to drop in here. That'll be great.
I think, but it was, yeah, I'll describe it in the issue. Right.
Perfect.
Already knocking it out. Wonderful. Any other additional topics that we'd want to explore or discuss next? Okay, super. Well, I think that may be it for wasmCloud Wednesday. I think a super productive meeting today, and a lot of awesome momentum for things in the ecosystem and the community. We have a ton of new capability providers coming online as people have really started to continue to build out some cool things, and I'm super excited. I'll go ahead and stop the recording here. As usual, I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Have a great day.